Okay, welcome back to a Rev 9 video. As you can see, we're on part 19. So, it's angloisrael.com, and we left off at Luke 23:30 as a quote to Hosea 10:8. I said, Christ will judge, then redeem the 12 tribes at end time. I said, well, I didn't quote Hosea 10:8. This is the first quote. So, let's go look at Hosea 10:8. But I should notice, or should point out, this is, if you just back up and look at Luke, start about 27. Large crowd of people followed him, including women who were beating their breasts and lamenting. Jesus, however, turning towards them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me. So he was taken off to be killed. But weep for yourselves and for your children, for now the days are coming. Now the days are coming. So he's talking about the future after he's murdered, in other words, after he's crucified. So this will be in the future after Christ is crucified, right? Happy are the barren, happy are the childless, happy are those who've never nursed. I said that's a prophecy in Isaiah, and you can find it. I forget the chapter. Look at your cross reference. Then the mountains begin to say, fall upon us into the hills, bury us. And I said that's Revelation, end of chapter 6. That's exactly what it says. That's an end time prophecy. He just said it was coming, so he's saying, he's quoting this. This is something that's going to be coming. Or you can say, well, he's comparing against something that already happened. But because if they do this with the green tree, what must happen to the rotten one? So he's, talking about himself being the green tree. And so again, the rotten one then is going to be destroyed at this later time, which is the context of what Christ just said. This is going to happen later. All right. So let's go back and look at the prophecy then and see if that's a historical prophecy or something later. Well, if when you're looking at it, you could just start at 10 verse 1. It talking about the vine. Israel poured out his fruit. So that's children. In other words, Israel, his vine, his tree, family tree, expanded. His fruits were increased. So his altars increased. So then he's going praying to other gods and, laying in luxury, and his idols excel, double-hearted. They are now condemned. Yeah, it says you can't follow me, God and mammon, right? So he's looking at all this money and all this wealth, and thinks that that's all he needs to depend on is how wealthy he is, and need to depend on God anymore. So that's the whole idea. And it says he will throw down their altars, their pillars destroy. He. Okay. And who is he? Well, you'd have to back up to Hosea chapter 9. If you go back to 9:7, it says the day of reckoning has come, the day of repayment. Israel shall know the reciters, in other words, the preachers were fools, that the man with the spirit was mad. Yes, because your preachers don't have any clue what's going to happen. They're telling you you're leaving, but in fact you're going to be judged. Because of your manifold vices, your destruction will be equally great. Ephraim, so again, talking to the 12 tribes, his prophet keeps a look against God, so, everything he does is against God. In other words, his prophet lays traps in his paths and destroy in the house of his gods, are deeply corrupt, right? So he remembers their fault and will punish their sin. That's verse 9. So he is judgment on the house of God. You just have to keep backing up till you put it in context. Obviously it's talking about Christ and judgment. I met Israel, verse 10, right? Okay, so it's about, and then it calls them ripe figs. All right. So fig tree, vines, all that's family trees. That's the context. Mentions Ephraim again. If their sons should grow up, I destroy them as men. Well, that's not good. But Ephraim produces his sons to be slain. Yes, because they just will not follow God's law, and they rely on their wealth. That's what he's telling them. You got all this wealth, but you don't have me. and the breasts that are dry. Oh, well, didn't it kind of say that? Happy, if you go back to Luke, happy are the barren, happy the childless, happy are those who have never nursed. In other words, they've never had a child. Their breasts are dry. Give them a womb that will fail. And go back to Hosea now. For their sins in Gilgal, I notice their plan. On account of their sin, I will drive from my home. So, drive them out of the house of God. I love them no more, for their princes rebel. So, those are the leaders. The ones in leadership positions that are there just making money and, living a life of luxury and all that. Verse 6:10, Ephraim's failed, their root is dried up. So think family tree. They cannot bear fruit, or if they should bear, I will kill the beloved of their breasts, just what it said above in 12. If their sons should grow up, I destroy them as men. Yeah. So you can go ahead and have all the kids you want. He's going to destroy them because you don't pay Christ the respect. My God, reject them, they listen not to him, and they shall be wanderers in nations. So, judgment on his people, because it says multiple times, Ephraim, Judah. Well, if you want to back up to the beginning of 8, you see, it's talking about Israel people, my bond, rebelled from my law. So you, Israel, knew me. That's 8:2, so it's talking about Israel. Israel cast off the good, they make kings to reign, but it was not from me. So think, your presidents, that's the failure of the church. I've said over and over and over again. The church was supposed to elect these kings to reign over you. We call them a president, and we call them this and that, whatever. Just look at whoever you elect, your representatives, your senators, all these people you elect. You elect local, you elect state, and you elect federal. So all of these nobles and these high-ranking people that you put over you, all the way up to the president, you elect. You go and you elect them. But they're not godly men. You don't go and do what he told you to do, which was to elect the most godly men that you can find. So you're supposed to raise these people up in your church as statesmen. All that knowledge should be taught to them in your church. That's what your church is for, to teach these people. And then at some point you elect the godliest, the best of the best to be the president, and then the second of the best to be the vice president, and so on, so on, so on. You see what I'm saying? Start at the top down, best of the best goes at the top. All right. That's what he's telling, but instead they just were luxury. They made idols of silver and gold. There it is right there. That's 8:4. All right, that's the idols. So there's your context. Like I said, just back up. You can always find the context. And of course, if you read through here, the whirlwind alone shall they reap. Yeah, the whirlwind. Of course, in verse 7, that's the tornado of fire and the tornado of sand. That's talking about Christ. Thus, Israel, you are gulped down, right, among nations like they dislike. So, yeah. Although they have hired the heathen, I'll gather them, they shall sigh. Depressed by the load of the emperor king, blah, blah, blah. Then it gets down to Ephraim. I wrote him a number of laws, but he thinks there are things that are strange. Verse 12. Yeah. Then it goes down and talks about Israel, forgetting his maker. Verse 13, 14, Judah. I will send fire to his towns, and her palaces I will consume. Well, yeah, get ready for it. Probably be next year or two, but here again, where's the blame come? Well, you can expect ungodly people to do ungodly things, but you were told to do what was right. And you, the house of God, the churches, the 100 and something thousand churches, are simply supposed to band together and do what the Bible said. That was it. Simple thing. Elect your best people. Teach them from day one. All these things that Christ taught about himself from Moses, the prophets, and Psalms. Same thing Paul did. All you had to do was just teach the things about Christ from Moses, the prophets, Psalms. Put them into action. Elect those people. Which does it on a national level, but you should do it on a local level, and even within your family. Like you said, write all his laws everywhere, teach them to your kids, raise your kids knowing his law and knowing the right thing, and you judge with a stick, a switch or whatever. You judge those you love as your children, so you don't let them violate the law and get away with it. They get justice too. And then on a local level, you have a justice system based on his law, and then on a national level, you maintain a justice system based on his law. That's what the Bible says all the way through. Just go back and start in Genesis. That's what it says from there all the way to the end of Revelation. Here, your country's being judged because you don't just do the simplest 101 Christianity. You don't do it. Okay, but it's absolutely about Israel and blah blah blah. Ephraim, Judah. Talking about redeeming them many times in their bond, the law, blah blah blah. Go on up to 8 to 9 to 10. It's all in the same context about Israel people. Absolutely, are talking about 12 tribes. Can't be talking about anybody else. So then, when it's talking about the preachers, the reciters had the Spirit, in other words, but they were mad. In other words, your preachers aren't teaching the simplest things. They're mad. Yeah. So their destructions are going to be even greater. You ain't going to be able to find a preacher. Could have just taught the simplest stuff. They get into all this complicated stuff, but they can't just do the simpler things and just tell you, how he wants his people to grow up and how he wants them to act according to his law. That's all. That's a simple thing. But you don't do that. So you get up to 10. This is in time when he comes back and destroys the house of God. Same thing we've said over and over and over. So when you get down to 10:8, the mountains and hills fall on us, blah blah blah. Yeah. Well, that's Revelation 6:16. Really. You, O Israel, have sinned. Okay. Should not war seize on the children of sin in Gibeah? Alright, so gee, that kind of looks like that's something that's already happened, but yes, it has, but it's going to happen again. So you could say it's a dual prophecy, or however you want to look at it. Okay, if you want to look at it as the Assyrian captivity. Alright, but for sure it's 12 tribes because 10 blush Ephraim, blush Israel, verse that's 6, 10:6. So for sure it's talking about the 12 tribes here. And he says, punish them both for their sin in verse 10. So yes, I would say house of Israel, house of Judah. That's the context all the way. We've already seen that. Ephraim, Judah, Jacob. Verse 11. So all 12 tribes being destroyed. So, okay. Well, that happened before, but again, it's going to happen again. You trusted on your course, on your number of men. So, think on your armies. No one can beat our armies, except your armies are $20 trillion in debt, and they will be beaten. Yeah. You can just read it. And Israel's king be destroyed in the morning. Well, obviously that's not Christ being destroyed. It's your king. The king, it said before, was the one that you elect and you put over you. So your king, your leader, in other words, your president. Your king will be destroyed in the morning. So that's 10:14. But that'll be your president of God's house. These two people, which is the two witnesses. Like I said, these two Christian empires. This is the two witnesses. Exactly what Revelation says, this is what this is. But it's not immediately obvious until you just kind of go through and read the whole thing. But, you can always just start at the beginning of Hosea, like I said, and you get down to 1:10. These people who are not my people now be called children of the living God. For I, speaking of Christ, will collect the children of Judah, the children of Israel, house of Judah, all 12 tribes, and they will appoint a single head for themselves and rise up from the earth for the great day of God's harvest. So that's the end of chapter 1. So the great day of God's harvest is Judgment Day. So it started right out talking about Judgment Day. Even though it mentions these things that were historical, it's still talking about dual prophecies. And Judgment Day, it doesn't change. Started right out Judgment Day. Okay? but then it talks about things that weren't where you were judged before. So in the same context of being judged before, in other words, all 12 tribes being judged before, now all 12 tribes are under Joseph's prophecy, under Manasseh and Ephraim, okay, which is what it's talking about. And they're being judged again. But this is an end-time judgment, where the other one was historical. Like I say, you go through chapter 11, got to be talking about the 12 tribes coming out of Egypt and so on and so forth. You were supposed to do what I said. Chapter 12, Ephraim surrounds me with lies, Israel's household with falsehood, but Judah runs with her God and with the faithful holy, or the saints, yeah. Judah, Jacob, Israel, justice and mercy in verse 12, 7. But Ephraim had this false balance. We'll think, stealing money through inflation, things like, financial crimes. You can look at it however you want. It's financially destroying your nation. All right, well, that's what $20 trillion of debt is. That's a financial, charge other people with financial crimes, but then the International Bank, of course, they can do that because, who are they? They're above it all, right? Alright, for I have declared by my preachers, revealed it by visions, that's 12:11. By means of the prophets I've foretold. Okay. Jacob, Israel, verse 13, all 12 tribes, the Lord Israel, led by a preacher and by a prophet, he guarded from Egypt. Alright, there you go. That prophet, they asked John, is he the prophet? Well, he's talking about this prophet who guarded the Israel people. It's talking about Christ. So this talks about Christ as a prophet, and he talks about him as a Messiah. So even they weren't sure exactly. Okay. He'll be judged. You can see that. So, yeah, look, it doesn't change context. It goes all through Hosea, talking about the same thing. Talking about redeeming from death. That's 13, 14, probably the dry bones, and then it wraps up. In 14, I will nurse those returning, 14:5, for my anger has vanished from them. In other words, he's shown them mercy at the end time, and to Israel I will be like the dew, and like the lily shall bloom. In other words, you'll have children. Again, vine, the figs, the tree, family tree. Like Lebanon send out his roots, family tree. Bright all spread out his boughs, family tree. Lebanon's fragrance. In other words, now they'll follow his law and they'll be working for Christ, and their fragrance will be good because they won't be committing all these sins, going around the world killing people in perpetual war. And those passing shall rest in his shade. He shall live like the corn, spread out like the vine, with a scent such as Lebanon's wine. So, yes, your children will do the right things from here on out. What, Ephraim, to me were your idols. I depressed you, but now I'll endow. So, you're a judge, but now he'll endow you, because that's the prophecy. That's what he said he'd do all along. I am like to a flourishing pine tree. Your fruit shall be found upon me. Children, tree of life. Okay, 14:9. Who is wise and comprehend these? I don't know. Who will reflect and endeavor to learn that the paths of the Lord are direct, and in them the righteous can travel, but the wicked will stumble on them. So the wicked, Jews against Christ, stumbling stone. The righteous, Jews for Christ, that endeavor to learn all these things. So there's your context. All right, let's go back to 23:34. Luke. All right, that's where they casted lots for clothing of Christ, and that went to Psalms 22:18. Christ crucified to redeem the 12 tribes, and I put this cross-reference on here. So, Alright, so that's the Roman soldiers talking about. So I put this cross reference to John 19:24. So let's go look at John 19:24 first. See what that says. Okay, 19:24. They divided my clothing, and it goes to Psalms. Alright, this is the same thing. Oh, and over my robe they threw dice. So that's Psalm 69:22. That's a same thing that's going on here. Soldiers, says then when the soldiers nailed Jesus to the cross, they took his clothes, divided them. Okay, they didn't want to tear up the robe, therefore they threw dice for his robe. This is what the soldiers did. Okay. So let's go to Psalms 22, 18. And recall that 22:18 then would be about Christ being crucified. So go to Psalms 22:18. I can count all my bones, they strain and stare at me. Amongst them they share my clothes, and for my robe cast dice. So, yes. And I've got I don't have the cross reference. I've got cross reference Matthew 27:36. So maybe Matthew 27:30. Oh, probably because it's let's just see what Matthew 27:36 is. All right. He cast lots for the division of his garments. So it's a cross reference, yeah. But it's a prophecy. Okay. They didn't have him crucified, and they cast lots for the division of his garments among themselves. Yeah. And they placed a sign, this is Jesus the King of Judea. So it's just a cross reference. It's the same kind of idea. Okay. Well. Okay, but if you read on, so Psalms 22:18, yeah, so 19, you Lord are not far, my God, oh haste to help, my lifeguard from the sword. So think Christ the shield, in other words, my darlings from the dog. The dog is referring to as the Edomites, they call them dogs. Save from the lion's mouth. So there you go, Christ the shield. Protect from tossing horns. Well, let's talk about them being, the Israelites being tossed up by kings. I forget what that is, but if you look that up, that's a prophecy of the end time. And then I'll tell my friends your name. Alright, well that goes back to Hebrews 2:12, a cross reference. And think among the crowd, in other words, Christ's friends, you'll tell about the message of Christ. Look on the Lord and praise. So that's verse 24, Psalms 22:24. And all Jacob's race extol, and Israel's race adore. So it's house of Israel, house of Jacob, all 12 tribes. Okay, so there's your context. Christ crucified to redeem the 12 tribes. Well, there it is right there. Okay, let's, just for fun, let's just go look in our real Bible. Let's just see what King James says. So that would be approximately 22:24. Right, for the dog has compassed me, the assembly of the wicked. It pierced my hands and my feet. Okay. I may tell all my bones, they look and stare upon me. They part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture. But be not thou far from me, O Lord, O my strength. Haste thee to help me. Deliver my soul from the sword, my darling from the power of the dog. Save me from the lion's mouth, for thou hast heard me from the horns of the unicorns. Well, that's interesting. Unicorns. Answer me kindly from the horns of the wild oxen. That's what it says in the Amplified. Wild oxen, New American. Wild oxen, New International. Over here it says unicorns. I will declare thy name to my brethren in the midst of the congregation will I praise thee. Ye that fear the Lord. Verse 23. Praise him, all ye the seed of Jacob. So when it says seed of Jacob, think posterity, because that's where Jacob goes back to. So we're way up here. He's talking about the seed of Jacob. Context of the New Testament was about the 12 tribes, him coming to his own, right? So seed of Jacob is the posterity, who have this faith of Abraham, right? All right. Ye that fear the Lord. So Jews for Christ, praise him. The posterity of Jacob, glorify him and fear him, all ye the seed of Israel. Okay, the posterity of Israel. So it says Jacob, Israel. He's talking all 12 tribes. And he's talking to the 12 tribes. Okay. And of course, his death then is redeeming the 12 tribes. Otherwise, he'd just say everybody. Well, why make it specific to the posterity of Jacob, Israel, which everybody knows is only these 12 tribes. Everyone else is excluded once you say that. If you were trying to make it a globalist message, just saying anybody and everybody can appeal to Christ, so you wouldn't make it specific. If that's what you wanted people to believe that it meant, you wouldn't make it specific. You would do anything except make it specific. You see? But no, it quotes right here. You go back here and it's specific to the 12 tribes. All right. I guess it's just people just teach it however. Let's go to 24:45. We're supposed to just forget about all this stuff. I don't know. 24:45. Oh. Wow. What was that? Goes to. Oh, that's John. Yeah. Well, this goes over to John. Then he opened his minds to enable them to understand the scriptures. Okay, well, there you go. So this was this last 40 days, Luke 24:44. This is last 40 days when Christ had been resurrected. He came back. He showed himself to, and of course it says other people came out of their tombs. So they saw, I don't know, hundreds of people who actually came up out of their tombs, so they were also resurrected, which was a sign to people, hey, this is, something's going on here, right? All right. So what he's telling you here, this is what I harp on. And just back up to, let's see, where would we have to start? I would say 24. 7. The Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of the wicked men and be crucified and rise again the third day. You notice there's no quote on that. So that's 24:7. There's no quote where Christ would rise on the third day. Like I said, try to find that in Scripture. You won't necessarily find that. I only found one verse that I think might be related. So then they, meaning the apostles and so forth. Oh, well, at any rate, this was, they were looking for the body of Jesus. Suddenly 2 men stood near them in robes. So these were angels, robes of dazzling brightness. So they were terrified by that, and they questioned, why are you searching for the living among the dead? He's not here, but he's risen. Recollect what he told you while he was still in Galilee. So there's the prophecy of rising on the third day. Then was a prophecy that Christ gave them. Maybe not in Old Testament, in other words. It was just something he said to the apostles, in other words. The Son of Man must be delivered over the hands of the wicked man, be crucified and rise again the third day. That's what Christ told them when he was with them. So there's nothing apparently in Old Testament, no quote. Then they remembered his statement. So what Christ told them before that they didn't understand, now they remembered that and they understood it. So they reported all this to the 11, the other apostles, as well to all the others. And just read on down. Reported this to the apostles. The statements appeared to them nonsense. Peter ran to the tomb. He looked in. And he was astonished. Yeah, very day, 2 of them were going to the village, verse 13. They were only 7 miles from Jerusalem, talking between themselves about all these things. And Jesus approached them, which they didn't recognize him. So, and one said, Cleophas asked him, are you the only resident in Jerusalem who does not know the events in it during the last few days? So everybody knew the events of the last few days. And Christ says, verse 19, what events? Yeah. Alright. Why, those concerning Jesus of Nazareth. So here they call him Jesus of Nazareth. Before, they questioned that he was a Nazarene, but they call him Jesus of Nazareth. Okay. So everybody knew he was Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet, powerful in act and word in the presence of God. Okay, so these guys walking around believe he was a prophet. But the chief priests and the nobles delivered him to a sentence of death. So the leadership, tells you right there. Chief people, nobles, elders, all those people that were involved at the highest levels, they killed him. They crucified him. See, they said the priest did it. Delivered him to a sentence. In other words, they had the Romans do the dirty work, but they're the ones that made the decision, made it all happen. Because otherwise, they just say, well, the Romans did it. And he didn't say the Romans did it. So obviously everybody knew the chief priests and the nobles gave him over to a sentence of death and how it all came about. And that was the chief priests and the nobles. Same people that tried to kill Paul. Yeah, okay. The nobility, highest of our leaders. We have hoped, however, that he was coming to deliver Israel. Really? You talking about resurrection? They hoped. In other words, the hope, the faith of Abraham is what he's talking about. That he was coming to deliver Israel. You see, that's those prophecies back there in the Old Testament. In other words, they had hoped that he was going to fulfill those prophecies about the resurrection of the 12 tribes that we call the Old Testament, which is all they had at the time. So that's what they were expecting. That's what they hoped for. And they're talking about, of course, from Abraham. But in addition, today being the 3rd day since all these events occurred, some women in our company have gone to the tomb, not finding the body. They had seen a vision of angels, verse 24, who said that he lives. So, there's your angels, two we read about a minute ago. So some of those with us proceeded to the tomb, found it just as the women had stated, but they did not see him. So, Christ, verse 25, how senseless and slow your hearts are to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Okay, well, all that the prophets had spoken included this hope that Christ was to deliver Israel. Okay, but that's the second coming of Christ, not the first. So now is when he's going to teach them about the second coming, when he comes back. Understand? Alright, ought not the Messiah to have suffered in this way and taken possession of his majesty by dying, Beginning then with Moses and going through all the prophets, verse 27, he explained to them everything in the sacred writings which referred to himself. Really? He went all the way back to Moses, Genesis, and all the way up through the prophets, Moses, the prophets, and Psalms. Then is how it sums it up just a few sentences later. And explained to them everything. Well, that would take a while, but let's go on. So arriving at the village, he acted like he'd go further, but they had him stay with us. He, according to them, went in to stay with him. They were reclining at the table. He looked at the loaf. He blessed it and broke it, distributed it. Their eyes were then open, and they recognized him, but he withdrew from their presence. In other words, he became invisible, as it says in John. That's what my Bible uses the term invisible. So that's what actually happened. He didn't just withdraw. I mean, they're sitting at the table, so obviously. And he said, was not our heart burning within us when he spoke to us, explained the scriptures? They then arose and returned to Jerusalem. Yeah, so they're still sitting there, and then he withdrew from them all of a sudden, yeah. So, just like the way he went into the room when it was locked, he became invisible and passed on to wherever. So they rose, they were found the 11. Master has risen indeed and had appeared to Simon. Then they recounted what had occurred on the road and had been known to them, and breaking the bread, and then just was gone. While they were discoursing, talking in this way, Jesus himself stood among them. So all of a sudden, boom, there he is. Verse 36, peace to you. But they were surprised and terror-stricken, imagining that they were gazing upon a spirit, in other words, an angel. So he just pops in and is like, oh, peace to you. Why are you startled? Verse 38. For what reason do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. It is myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit has not flesh and bones, such as you perceive I possess. So, yeah. So it's not just a vision, in other words. So, saying, he showed him his hands and feet. Well, they still disbelieved from delight and astonishment. He asked them, hey, anything eatable? Well, yeah, okay, so he's really alive and a person if he wants to eat. They gave him a piece of fish. Taking it, he ate it in their presence. He said to them, those were facts which I told you while I was with you, in other words, walking on the road, how all that is written, well, okay, talking about things that when he was with them, he told them, the apostles, how all is written concerning me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and Psalm must of necessity be fulfilled. So, if you go back to Moses, the prophets, and Psalms, the problem is that almost all of that is about the second coming of Christ. So he didn't fulfill all those things. That's the problem. He didn't actually come to redeem Israel. Well, he fulfilled his death, which will do that at the end time, but he's still letting the wheat and the tares grow up together, you see. So he didn't come back, he didn't fulfill Hosea 1, 9, and 10, for example. He didn't fulfill Ezekiel 37, the second half, where he's going to come back together, bring all 12 tribes unto him in New Jerusalem, and then take over and rule the world with an iron rod, and do all these things. See, most of these prophecies are second coming. He didn't do that, which is why they kept wanting a sign. But he did fulfill everything about the first part of the first coming. And some of those are intertwined, so it's a little more difficult to understand. But here it says in 45, okay, he then opened their minds to enable them to understand the scriptures, saying to them, thus it was written that Messiah must suffer, rise again on the third day, and there you go. See? Thus it was written. That's verse 36. But no, the third day, which he said back in 24:7, was something that he had said to them. It wasn't written. They're just talking about it now. It wasn't written down, but right there He says, thus it was written that the Messiah must suffer and rise from the dead the third day. So he's indicating that it was written somewhere. In other words, it's in our Old Testament. There's something written in these prophecies of Moses, the prophets, and Psalms that Christ would rise on the third day. Now you go find that. I've looked for that. At any rate, let's continue. And that a change of mind with a pardon of sins be proclaimed to the heathen, beginning at Jerusalem. Well, the heathen he's talking about, the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Maybe some of the Jews against Christ who repented after all, so on. Alright. He's just talking about 12 tribes. He's not saying a change of mind to everybody on earth. Because what he's talking about is everything about himself. And Moses, the prophets, and Psalms will be fulfilled. But there's nothing in Moses, the prophets, and Psalms about Christ redeeming the whole world or giving salvation to the whole world. You go look at Moses, the prophets, and Psalms, and it's all about Christ redeeming the 12 tribes. That's the context. I mean, Christ says that's the context. I mean, that's what he just said. Everything written back there. He's not saying he's creating something new to everybody. He just confirmed everything that they believed on, which was this hope that he would come to deliver Israel. They didn't say they were hoping he'd come to deliver everybody. No, it's specific. And here, Christ kept it specific, so he didn't change it either. Pastors changed it. Change of mind was for the Israel people and the ones that were against him to believe on him. Pardon of sins was what he promised Abraham, that he would come to pardon the sins, give mercy on his offspring. These heathen, beginning at Jerusalem, you are witnesses of these events, and remember that I will send the promise of my Father, in other words, the Spirit, but stay in this city until you are endowed with power from on high. So the Spirit is what he's talking about. That was a promise. So then he raised his hand, blessed them. And while he was blessing them, he was removed with them, being conveyed to heaven. So there you go. This was his last 40 days. Now, I don't think it says 40 days there, but it does over here in Acts. So if you just go on to Acts, I'll pour out my Spirit on your sons and daughters. Yeah, okay, well, there's a Spirit that I was just talking about in Acts 2:17, so on. It goes down, Joel. So that's Joel. We're talking about Spirit. Somewhere here it says 40 days. I don't know. Oh, here you go. Back up. Acts 1, verse 3. To whom he also presented himself alive with many proofs after his suffering. Then, in other words, he's resurrected, appearing to them during 40 days.